She does other things. She's got a journalism career that has a number of different topics on it as a senior writer for Sports Illustrated and the MMQB. But on our show, she has just been our Deshaun Watson correspondent. I look forward to talking to her about other things that aren't just this story, but she has had advancements on this story. And this has been a complicated one for us to talk about around here because I don't know how to properly support women. And while he's still on the field, also have a conversation about sports and what he's worth and where he should be starting and if the Eagles are going to trade for him. So we're bringing in Jenny again to tell us about the additional reporting she has done here and to get us caught up on this story where there have been very few advancements. Thank you, Jenny, for making the time. Again, what are the things people need to know from your most recent reporting?
Yeah, thanks for having me back on, Dan. I really appreciate our last conversation, and I'm glad to be back today. I think the recent story that we wrote was giving a window into what is sometimes the opaque investigation that takes place within the NFL. We hear a lot about the NFL's investigations arm and the personal conduct policy and the potential disciplines, but we don't often have an insight into what that process is like. So we spoke to two women who are plaintiffs. One of them was the first woman to file a suit against Deshaun Watson, alleging that he perpetrated some form of sexual misconduct to her during a massage appointment. And the second woman subsequently filed a lawsuit against Watson. We spoke to them about how their lives have changed since coming forward, but also their experiences with NFL investigators. And both of them have also gone to the police. They have filed complaints with the police as part of the Houston Police Department's ongoing criminal investigation. And they said that their interviews with the police contrasted with their interviews with the NFL. And in particular, both women, Ashley Solis and Lauren Baxley, described the NFL questioning them about what they were wearing during their appointments, which they perceived as victim blaming and putting an emphasis on their own actions rather than Deshaun Watson's actions. So a lot is ongoing in the case. The civil court process is slow. There hasn't been a result with the criminal investigation yet. In Texas, a grand jury would need to be convened to bring any felony charges. But both of them expressed frustrations with the NFL investigation, the approach of the questioners, but also the message that the NFL's inaction to this point, which they feel sends about their complaints and their allegations.
Did you try to get more than two voices on this so it couldn't be diluted or minimized as just two voices saying this and be a repeated pattern? Or is it very difficult? Are these women, are their lives in such upheaval that it's really hard to get them to talk about anything?
Yeah, so their lives have been, as they described it, in upheaval since they were named publicly. We had been requesting interviews with the different plaintiffs since March, and to date, this was the first interview that Ashley and Lauren, who we spoke with, had done. One plaintiff did a interview with a local Fox station the week before, but they really haven't spoken a lot, and I think there's a few reasons for that. One is that most lawyers advise their clients to speak as little as possible during ongoing litigation because it opens the door for, discovery, different questions to be asked, et cetera. But also, as you referenced, there has been a lot of backlash. Ashley Solis described there was an attempted break-in at the private studio where she works. She now no longer advertises the studio the same way. She keeps the address hidden until you book an appointment. She only takes new clients who are referrals. The other woman, Lauren, that we spoke to, Lauren Baxley, described feeling concerned for her personal safety after reading some of the comments on the live stream of a press conference in April where they were named. So her partner began walking her to and from her car with a weapon. And additionally, she had a bizarre interaction with a grocery delivery person focused on her name and her identity. So she pays cash. So I think there have been ripple effects that they've been working through handling over the last several months as well.
It's fairly amazing to see this play out so obviously on, hey, this is why it's hard for all of these women to come forward right here. It's the entirety of the system ends up landing on their neck. And instead of, instead of being whistleblowers, they end up becoming victims again and again.
Yeah, I think that's what they conveyed to me exactly, Dan, is that one of the women, Lauren Baxley, said, there was the initial trauma of the session in which the alleged assault happened, but then there has been additional traumas that have happened every day since coming forward with her name.
And so these women are brave by going against attorney advice and telling you this story because what? They don't want to be seen as gold diggers. They want to fight against the systemic pressure that they're getting. What is the motivation?
Yeah, so there's a few things. I think interestingly, the perception out there that they are gold diggers is really what spurred Lauren Baxley was the first woman to actually go to the Houston police and file a complaint, which she did in early April, April 2nd, I believe it was. And she did that in part because she saw a lot of the responses to the civil lawsuits. Why haven't these women gone to police? And there's a lot of reasons that women don't go to police. Sexual assaults and other forms of sexual misconduct have typically low reporting rates. But that was part of her reason for coming forward to police. And I think in part they were spurred to speak out now because they saw the focus on Deshaun Watson's football career without specific mention of the fact that there are 22 lawsuits alleging sexual misconduct or harassment. And there's an active criminal investigation with, I believe it's 10 criminal complaints filed. So to your earlier point, Dan, I think it is a question that people in sports media are grappling with, right? How do you talk about the fact that this is a top 5 quarterback who had an excellent season last year despite the team's struggles? And in January, the focus was on, well, he doesn't want to play for the Texans anymore. Where is he going to play in the future? And then in March, the first lawsuit was filed, which then led to total of 22 active lawsuits. There are other women who have been affected. We wrote an account of one woman we called Mary in March. She hasn't to date filed a lawsuit. And so I think now we're at this point where there's this awkwardness of him being at Texans camp. What will happen to him this season? And those are all very real questions hanging over the team. What I think the answer is just anytime that those conversations are happening, for there to be a specific mention of what the allegations are against him, that there are 22 lawsuits that have been filed alleging harassment and misconduct, that there is an active criminal investigation. I think specifically making reference to and not minimizing the stories and accounts of the women who have come forward is important to any conversation about his football future.
Did these two women think that the police were more gentle in their questioning than the NFL was?
So they did. They interviewed with the adult sex crimes division of the Houston Police's Special Victims Unit. And there has been an effort over the last 10 years for police and other law enforcement authorities to incorporate more trauma-informed questioning. So essentially avoiding phrasing of questioning that can be perceived as victim blaming, that could make the person coming forward less willing or able to share the information that authority needs. Also offering them kind of an open narrative. So you ask what happened, describe what happened, keeping in mind that if somebody has experienced trauma, their memory might not be linear. So instead of saying what happened next, just what happened, or if you ask a question, setting it up in a way that understands why you're asking the question. And that was the experience they had with the Houston police. Whereas Lauren Baxley, one of the women, said that she felt as though, she was cut off during the questioning with the NFL. They circled back around. She felt like they were trying to trip her up. Also, they questioned, she said, what she was wearing, and also her response to what she said happened in the appointment. In her account, she said they asked her why she froze, didn't end the appointment. And I think, certainly in an interview, you want to be getting information, and the NFL doesn't have subpoena power, for instance. So they do have to assume that going into any interview setting, this may be their only opportunity to interview the person that they're talking with. But I think framing of questions is very important. And regardless of what the NFL felt like it needed to ask or information that they believed was pertinent, I think the framing is important. And the end result is that 2 of the 10 women who have interviewed with the NFL felt as though they were disrespected, felt as though the tone was victim blaming. And certainly that doesn't help for getting people to participate in investigations in the future.
Malice, incompetence, or protecting Deshaun Watson, or yes, or all of the above?
I can't weigh in specifically on what was in the investigators' minds. We did try to get as much information. We pressed the NFL for an on-the-record comment. The only on-the-record comment they gave us was that they understand that it's difficult for women to come forward and they appreciate them doing so. In some of the complaints, civil complaints that were filed, there's a reference to Watson asking women to wear something specific to the massage appointment. So the information that we received is that the NFL asked them, well, did he make this request? Did you comply? And what did you wear? But I think those questions can still be perceived in a victim blaming way, even if that's information that you need to collect. I think the framing of questions is important. And also it's important to remember too, that it's very difficult to consent in a situation where there's an power imbalance between an important client like Deshaun Watson and a massage therapist that's trying to build up their business. And even if a woman did comply with his request, that doesn't really have any bearing on his stated defense, which is that all interactions were consensual. And you could comply with what the client asked you to wear because you wanted to keep their business. It wouldn't necessarily have any relation to, or it wouldn't have any relation to what happened in the appointment. So I think that was where the women felt frustrated in that, trauma-informed victim interviewing puts the onus on the suspect's behavior, not the victim's behavior. And they felt as though that was not the case in their conversation.
This is fascinating, though, because I really, it sounds like what you're saying is clearly, given the nature of what we're talking about, you should be asking these women questions as if they're victims. You don't have to presume them innocent of anything or guilty of anything, but let's just say they're victims. And you're saying that the questions are making them feel like accusers.
Yeah, I think there's a way to ask from the experts that we've spoken to. You ask open-ended questions and give the person the opportunity to tell you what happened. Now, the NFL will say, unlike the police or the district attorney who might have a second chance at such interviews and could thus ask more pointed questions in those interviews, the NFL had to get everything in one shot. I think the counter argument to that would be, is if your approach is making women feel blamed or alienated, then you would be even less likely to get a second chance at them cooperating with the process. But I think the idea behind trauma-informed, interviewing is to be able to get all of the information you need without causing damage to the person coming forward. And also, was put in place in part because reporting rates are so low, or a lot of people drop out of the process of, working with law enforcement because it causes strain. And so this kind of interviewing was put into place to allow authorities to get the information they want. I should quickly add that, these two women, Ashley Solis and Lawrence Baxley, were among the first three women to meet with NFL investigators. Their attorney, one of their attorneys, Tony Busby, said he sat in on the fourth session. There was another lawyer present for the first three. He said he attempted to reset the tone, and the conversations since then have been better received by his clients. So there, in his telling of it, there has been a little bit of a shift, which is why, they ultimately have allowed 10 of their clients to interview with the NFL.
Do you view your reporting as activism?
I don't. I view my reporting as sharing the accounts from both sides. I'm trying to put forth as much information as we can in this story. I think there has been a dearth of reporting in terms of what the women experienced. I think there has not been a lot of reporting on their accounts or what the process has been like for them. Every story we do, we have gone to Rusty Hardin, Watson's attorney, requesting comment in an interview. They did not respond to our requests for an interview or comment for this story. But I don't view it as activism. I view it as, shining a light on information that we haven't known before. We hear a lot about the NFL's investigation arm, but we have no idea what that process is actually like. And so we'd been requesting interviews with the plaintiffs since March, and this was a time in which they decided to move forward with an interview, and we appreciated the opportunity to hear their perspective and share their insight.
That's fair and it's objective, and that's also kind and thorough of you. But you do realize that what you're doing here is showing everybody in real time why this is so hard for women to do. Look, this has happened to you, and then everything that happens after that, the people are not equipped. The system built by men, favoring men, the police department is better at this than the NFL is because they're ill-equipped. Why would the NFL investigators, the NFL should never be in this business of being this all-powerful moral authority. And they got into that business, and Goodell got a lot of money for getting into that business, and they cleaned up their league's image, but they're not equipped, Jenny. Like they're amateurs at this.
Yeah. And I think really that is what the women's accounts show. And I think you're right. There's definitely a conversation to be had about why they're in this, what the goal and end results and all of those things are. But the fact of the matter is the commissioner does have sweeping authority. And, in light of that, the fact that, for instance, he hasn't used the exempt list, when the personal conduct policy specifically says if information collected in the course of investigation leads the commissioner to believe a violation may have occurred, he could put a player on the exempt list. And then you have a reporter from the league-owned media outlet saying that as a result of the policy and the way that it's written, the fact that the exempt list hasn't been used means that the commissioner doesn't believe to date a violation may have occurred. I think from the women's perspective, then that does feel like a minimization of their accounts and that there's some doubt being cast on them. And I think to your other point, Dan, and I think it's really, I'm glad that you brought it up because I think what we don't see enough of is the reporting of what is it like for people who come forward. Often in sports media, the emphasis is entirely on the athlete and the team and will he be back on the field, right? And I think part of the reason that the conversations sometimes devolve on these topics is because we don't see both sides. And while my story is presenting the voices of the women, we did seek to hear the voice of Deshaun. He, did not respond to the interview request through his attorney. But the point being is that that's the perspective we almost never hear. And we rarely hear from women who are going through the NFL's investigative process. And that's why we thought it was important to work on the story. My editor, Gary Gramling, has worked on me with all of these Watson stories. We felt like it was important to share what it's like for somebody going through the personal conduct process because that's the side we almost never hear.
Are we really going to get to game one and someone accused of this is going to be in an NFL huddle? Like, because the litigation process and the investigation process has to move slowly. Is that really what the NFL, if you had to guess which way we're going to end up here, you're guessing this guy's going to be in a huddle in game one?
So I don't know exactly how the Texans will handle him. But as far as how the league will handle Watson, to this point, it doesn't seem as though they are inclined to use the exempt list, which is the paid leave that would be created to take a player off the field in the face of serious allegations. It doesn't seem as though they're inclined to use that unless there's some movement on the criminal charges. Right now, there's just criminal investigation. We have no indication if charges will be filed. Now, in the past, yes, the majority of times they've used the exempt list has been when there have been criminal charges filed. But there have also been cases where there has been embarrassing public evidence, such as the Kareem Hunt video that was released. No charges were filed in that case. Josh Brown, the former Giants kicker, there were journal entries and other personal documents released in which he appeared to admit having abused his wife. The exempt list was used in that case. And I think Antonio Brown is a similar situation here because when the civil suits the NFL doesn't have a precedent of putting a player on the exempt list just when a civil suit is filed. But when the investigation progresses to the fact of them collecting information and interviewing witnesses, people affected, then they can use it. And that's what happened in Brown's case. They didn't use it because he wasn't with a team, but the civil suit was filed by a former trainer alleging rape. and other forms of sexual assault. They did not put him on the exempt list right away. But later that fall in 2019, when both that woman and a second woman that my former Sports Illustrated colleague, Robert Klumko and Gary Gramling, wrote about, an artist who said he'd engaged in misconduct toward her and then sent her threatening messages. Both of those women met with the NFL, and several outlets, including the NFL Network, said if a team were to re-sign Brown, the league was going to put him, or was ready to put him, on the exempt list. And I think it's really hard to draw an apt parallel to the Watson case because there are so many women coming forward. But I think what you have to look at is what information does the league have, not to conclude his investigation necessarily, but what information does it have to sort of meet that burden that's listed in the personal conduct policy of the commissioner having, believing that a violation may have been committed. Well, right now they have at least accounts from at least 10 women who say that he perpetrated misconduct or harassment to them.